Hey, it's Dave and Paul here. Before we start this week's episode, special announcement is that we got a special bonus episode planned. It's an idea that Paul came up with, but we want to hear from you. So, Paul, tell them how it's going to work.
Yeah, so we really were trying to look for ways to engage a bunch of people. And obviously we have these episodes that come out once every 2 weeks. And, that only affords us so many guests per year. And we know there's so many awesome voices out there and everyone's had fun experiences. So we thought, what's a really fun way that we can get a lot of people involved? And I think we've all heard different radio shows or, different things on maybe NPR or something where they'll have little segments of people calling in. And we thought, what better way would there be to collect all these? And so we have the opportunity with all these bonus episodes to do kind of a fun call-in episode. So it's really going to be all composed of people that have called in. And we're having people call us at 859-412-1766, which is just a free Google number we set up. And then they have 3 minutes to leave a message with whatever their favorite, most memorable event day story is. I know that might be tight to fit into 3 minutes, but we're hoping to get some really good stuff.
Yeah, your favorite event day story. Or, if you have something you want to rant about or just share from the past year, we're open to whatever, but it's just a great chance for us to hear from you, whether you were a previous guest on the podcast or just a longtime listener, first-time caller. We'd like to hear from you. That number again, 859-412-1766. And you can leave the message and you can call back. If you don't like what you did, you can call back and do it again. It's easy for you. But we'd love to hear from you and have you be a part of our adventures in Venueland, a special bonus episode we do here kind of to wrap up the year.
Be sure to call in, contribute your voice, tell your friends, reach out to your coworkers that you work with at venues. If you know, those friends of yours that work at a venue or you've worked with for years, who always has that fun, story at the bar of, this one time and this one artist. And also one thing to note is if you're not as comfortable of telling who you are, where you're from, just call in and say the story. You don't need to mention your name. You don't need to mention anything else. So you can kind of keep it anonymous if you want to share a little bit of a racy story that you don't want people to know who it is. But also feel free to include your name and your location. So you can, say, I'm Paul Hooper here from Lexington, Kentucky, here's my or, just keep it anonymous. So really we leave it up to you.
Yeah, we'll play your voice mail back. We're not going to use any vocoders or, anything to change your voice, but feel free to do it. The number again, 859-412-1766. And the sooner the better, because we are looking to get this episode here recorded soon. Right, Paul?
Yeah, we're going to compile them all together. We're going to get a bonus episode out around the holidays. We thought that would be kind of a fun time to do it where people could listen in, hear themselves, hear their friends. So definitely try to send it to us soon. We'll leave it open for a few weeks and stuff, but get it into us soon.
All right. So we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, here we go. Another great episode coming your way. A really unique story that's very inspiring too. So kind of an adventures with adventures. I don't know, but here, check this one out. I think you're going to like it.
All right, here is Steve Sternschein.
Hello and welcome to Adventures in Venueland, an EAMC podcast. This is your all-access pass to go backstage and behind the scenes with some of the brightest minds that cross the scope of the live entertainment industry. I'm Dave Rettelberger.
And I'm Paul Hooper. We'll introduce you to some of our favorite people as we dive deep into the world of live touring shows and the venues that host them.
Our adventure today takes us deep into the heart of Texas. We're speaking with the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Adventures, oddly enough. He was also a founding board member of the National Independent Venue Association, which all of us know from the big Save Our Stages effort. He owns and operates several venues in Central Texas, and you've probably seen him around because he's done a lot of panels and appearances. He kind of has a grip on everything in the live music biz. Steve Sternschein, welcome to the broadcast.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Real good. So let's start off, if you don't mind, with adventures, right? Because we're on Adventures in Venueland, and you started this whole big thing, which is ad.ventures. So what is this?
Well, I mean, the name comes from, my thought was like calling up my friends and saying, hey, do you want to go on an adventure with me and my team? And the kind of starting point for that was, having spent many years as a venue operator, trying to bring opportunities and partnerships into our space, but just not having the scale that's required to entice a national or global brand. So the concept is very simple. We just have a great group of folks who, all of whom are interested in those same kind of adventures that I am. And we're talking and working with partners, in every sector of the, every kind of company that could possibly be interested in addressing or working with the audiences that we bring together, for shows and art experiences. And I think the real big difference between what we can provide as a kind of distributed network is just an authentic kind of connection to the local communities that our venues exist in and support, in a way that, nobody else can really offer that, kind of opportunity to not just have their brands and offerings in front of the right audience, but also know that, like, in doing that and bringing those offers in, they're also support, just like by nature of it, supporting the community that exists there. So that's really a special opportunity. And it came from the work that we did, at NEVA with Save Our Stages. And, the need kind of like became very clear, in the context of the pandemic and everything's shutting down. We were like, how are we going to get folks to help when there's so many other problems in the world? And the biggest thing that we could do was offer to use our expertise to bring an audience together around live music. And even though we couldn't do it in person, we did it, virtually and incrementally over and over again. So that's what Adventures is. It's an agency for venues and promoters to help them to monetize.
Well, it's all about the power of the many too, right? Being stronger, like it gives you more negotiating power if you have a lot of these small venues, small clubs that they would never have individually. And I think that's something we've talked about on this podcast, and I think it's national conversation too, at least within the live event industry, is one of the massive, there's been so many awful things that have come out of the last year and a half, and unfortunately a lot of venues that have closed, but the ones that have stuck around, I think one of the great things is it has pulled so many of these independent promoters, independent venues that have these little small venues that, if anything, they might have even been prideful on, like, we're doing this by ourselves and we're, toughing it out. Now it's like, I think there's this, through NEVA and through so many different organizations, it's really pulled them together to how do we work with each other to sort of like become a bigger seat at that table. And obviously they've done it with, nationally and with, using congressional support and all this stuff like that. But, I think it's a beautiful opportunity, like you're saying, is how can you do that to leverage and get, ad revenue and sponsorship dollars that, this one little club in a small town would never be able to approach, like an Anheuser-Busch. Mm-hmm. But, all of a sudden you've got 5 or 6 different venues coming together. And then not only do you have more power to approach one of those bigger companies, but you're also giving those companies the ability to kind of have a better, more grassroots approach by working with these small clubs than they would of, working with a large stadium or something.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I think, it's interesting to think about, the why behind, where was this 10 years ago? What kept us from figuring out that we could do something like this? And I think, it's kind of the answer is twofold. And sometimes I think it has to do with, just that like diehard independent spirit that kind of like doesn't allow for, too much collaboration. But I think more commonly, it's just a bandwidth issue where when you are an independent and you're bootstrapping, every single one of us has not enough people and not enough hours in the day to just kind of keep the doors open and keep shows flowing. So, we all kind of have, I think we've all dreamed of being able to do this kind of stuff, but never had the time to think about how to make it real. And so pandemic and its, and all its, all the negatives, like the positive thing was we all had a lot of time to stop and say, hey, if we're going to go back, I think I had a moment where I was just like, if I'm going to go back to doing this again, because like at some point everyone was like, is this my life anymore? Can I do this again? The first thing I thought about was like, if I'm going to do it, we have to make some changes. And the biggest change is that, we can't operate in that way anymore. We can't be understaffed. We can't be paying people not enough, like everybody needs to be comfortable and happy and in order to be successful in this space. And I think the challenge with music in general is it's such a wonderful, beautiful thing. It's easy to like put aside things like, oh, I'm not making as much money, or man, I wish I had more time to focus on, making this great, but I can't, but it's okay. Cause it's, cause this show is awesome. There's just enough awesome shows to keep you from, really turning away. And so, that's one of the things that I'm trying to change. I think at the very base of it, there's in the independent space, people don't understand how valuable what they do is. We never really kind of like had the opportunity to say, wait a second, what we do is really important. And if it doesn't happen anymore, it's going to be really terrible for our whole community and for, artists and everywhere. So if that's the case, then we need to start standing up and holding the line, so to speak, on that value proposition and really being able to say no more than we say yes, So, and it's hard to do that when you're in that fire, when you're in that like channel and the fire hose is coming at you, so even just having, the perspective of not being one venue, but thinking about it from like the pulled back position of a national network, it allows us to go in and instead of just, like, for example, it's like, the first thing is like, is there an opportunity that's interesting? The second thing is like, well, are we just going to say yes to whatever is offered, or are we going to spend the time and energy to like get competitive offers and understand really the value, like the ask and what the value is to our partners, and make sure that we're getting, the right deal for what we're offering.
Yeah, Steve, it's you bring up that point, which is, so many people, and when we talk here in Adventures in Venueland, as so many of our guests, the underlying thing is that, there's a passion for live music, right? There's that passion there. And you don't often hear people starting off from a passion for money, right? So to be able to then, reach out to venues from, Colorado and California, Los Angeles, Atlanta, bring them all together and kind of give that, that leverage for the money, because that it's such a key thing, because we learned over through the pandemic that without the money there, we're all in some trouble.
Yeah, that's right. It's a means to an end. And, it's like, it's not just, and it really comes down to like making sure that the people that I care about, who are the folks that work in our clubs and play at the clubs, that's where I come from. I'm a bass player first. And for a long time, like I didn't talk about that. Like I thought it was like kind of like a dirty secret that I was a musician first, because I didn't want to be that guy who was like, hey, like come to my club and my band's playing, like,
right. Like, we all know that guy.
Sure.
Right. But really it's like kind of the most important thing I found, again, like during pandemic, trying to connect with people on a screen, right? Like, it made a big difference to say, oh yeah, I'm a musician too. And I think that like, I really believe that, we can make everyone's lives meaningfully better through adventures.
Let's talk about making people's lives better, because it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another to actually be a part of something that impacted so many lives. And so Save Our Stages. Everybody that's in this industry is familiar with that whole program. But, when you start talking about the 10 million, raised for the National Independent Venue Association and drafting that legislation that ultimately resulted in $16.2 billion with the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program. I mean, it is huge. The Save Our Stages Fest, where you've got Miley Cyrus and the Foo Fighters, the Roots, so many big things, but it all started from an idea. So take me back to March 2020 and how you got involved and how this whole thing started. Because we all had time to do ideas, but not many of us did them.
Yeah. So probably the place to start in March 2020, like for me, pandemic started with South by Southwest canceling. That was like what happened in Austin. That it was a little, and we were a little bit ahead of everybody else because of the international kind of component. I think it was like the second big thing to cancel. The first thing was Ultra Music Festival in Florida. And it was like a really crazy time for me because I had co-founded and was running a software company called Prism.fm at the time. And also, working on continuing to do my venue stuff. But, I kind of had to, drop everything I was doing and just focus. At that time, the first thing was, I was like, oh my God, our staff is going to be fucked, because they're supposed to make all this money in the next few weeks and that's not happening. So we started a relief effort called Banding Together in Austin. And I did that with the Red River Cultural District Merchant Association, which is another organization that I helped to found maybe like 5 years ago, I think, that represents all of the music venues in the Red River District in Austin. That's like Stubbs and Mohawk and Empire and Barracuda. And what we did was we literally just put up a GoFundMe type thing and asked for help. Initially, we were trying to rebook all of the South by shows because bands still wanted to come and people still were going to come out. But there was a point when that became impossible and we had to just shut everything down. And so we pivoted to, just a very simple relief effort where we would take the money that was raised and issue HEB gift cards. HEB is like a Texas-based food chain.
Okay.
And so, we figured out that it costs about, $7,500 to eat for a week. And so we started issuing these gift cards to anyone who was a, hospitality or production worker, and not eligible for unemployment insurance, because they're a contract worker. And so we raised initially like something like, and it was interesting because you said a lot of people thought about things but didn't do them. Like the biggest challenge initially was, hey, we're not going to raise enough money, so we shouldn't do this. And my response was like, well, we got to try. And, we were able to raise $100,000 initially. And I think over the course of the next year, I think we've sent out something like 4,000 or 5,000 of these HEB cards, and raised about $300,000. So I was doing that initially. That was where I was when I got a call from my friend Moose over at Marauder, and he had been one of our marketing vendors, right? Like I had hired him to help us with our startup. And so he called me and was kind of like, man, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? Like, I see this Banding Together thing. I think that's really smart. Like, I'm thinking about getting people together through Independent Venue Week around the country just to like talk about what's going on and see if we can't let more people know, like, to watch out, like this is coming. And so we had basically this Zoom with like 100 or so operators around the country. And Moose was able to get an English event organizer. And at the time, again, England was a little ahead of us, right? So we got somebody on the phone or on the Zoom that was able to he basically was like, here's the deal. It's going to start like a trickle. And within a few weeks, you're going to have no business left whatsoever. And you're going to have to let go of all your employees. And if there's anything I could tell you right now, it's like, start planning now for how to deal with this because it's coming, it's inexorable. Like there's no way that it's going to not happen here. That was very sobering and scary for a lot of people. And I kind of talked about the impact of what was happening in Austin, to the group. And I also talked about how we had created the Red River District and what that was doing. And I think, and Dana was basically like Dana Frank from First Avenue was on that call and was like, I see all these other big corporate interests getting stuff in the relief program, that the federal government's putting together, but there's nothing in here for us. Like, maybe we should figure out how to like start advocating for relief and at the congressional level. And we all thought that was a great idea. And so there were a couple more meetings, and then we kind of voted to elect an initial kind of like board that would be responsible for like simply starting an advocacy effort, funding it, and doing everything we could, to get Congress to pay attention to the plight of independent venues. And that's how it started. We just kind of like, it took about 2 weeks, and, we had this conversation where everybody was like, well, I can do this, I can do that. And my kind of like, nobody wanted to be the treasurer or deal with money. And I was like, well, I'm great at raising money. So like, let me do that. That's what I'm going to do. And so that was really how it all started, was just, and it's funny because the people that ended up, on this, at the start of NEVA, like the group was actually almost the same group that had been on this panel together a couple months before that Dave Brooks put together for Billboard. I think it was called like Life After the Check or something, like Life After Saying No to the Check, meaning like people who were independent and not, a part of the Live Nation or AEG infrastructure, and like how we were able to survive and thrive. And so that was like me, Dana, and Stephen Chilton from the Rebel Lounge in Arizona. Like Justin Cantor and Hal Real like weren't on that panel, but we all kind of knew each other beforehand from various things. Justin and I go way back, because I'm from New York, New Jersey originally, and I've been to LPR a zillion times. My bands have played there when I was managing. So it was just kind of like, like the connections, at least personally, had been made before NEVA became a thing. And we all had the conversations before about how we thought it would be great if independents spent more time working and talking together. And I think we all recognized that the moment to do that had come. And,
Sure.
I've never been a part of a more impressive team of people that just crushed everything that we set our mind to. It was really special to be in that group of folks. And and again, like as an independent operator, you don't get that experience too often, right? Like this was like a real, I really felt like everybody was excellent at what they were doing and like overachieving and putting we worked 24/7 to get this stuff going, and over the course of the next few months, we ended up putting together lots of volunteers and help to the point, I think, where we had like 200 volunteers at the height of it, and couldn't have done it without that larger group. I mean, obviously, it was a huge Herculean effort to, connect with every congressperson in the country, district by district, and tell the story of our venues and how they are important to the community and what would happen if they didn't exist in the future. So, it was a whirlwind.
I'm sure too, you kind of hit on how some of you all were already connected, through, whatever it was, conferences or meeting or, kind of chatting about it previously. But once you all started finally kind of buying in and creating NEVA, there was this magnetism that brought in these other, maybe even lower tier independent venues, maybe these clubs that were in these smaller cities that maybe had never connected. So as you all started sort of building that machine and gaining this momentum, I can imagine that you had these other groups and clubs from all over the country that maybe no one had connected with before, that caught wind of it on a radio story or heard about it from something else and are like, oh shit, like I manage this small little club. I've never really talked to any other clubs or groups before, but now there's this group of like-minded people that are like me going through that same, drudge of things right now. So I'm sure it just gained all this momentum too over time, because as you all became more this public eye, that just informs more of those other people that maybe didn't know about it otherwise.
So I think there's two things on that topic. The first thing is I think the first kind of like 300 or 400 venues that joined NEVA, were mostly people who we knew that we had reached out to in some way to join. But we went from like, there was a moment when I think we kind of announced NEVA in the press, in Billboard and Polestar, and like we made that announcement, and like within a week we had doubled our membership, and then within another week we had doubled it again, and it was like so crazy how quickly that happened. And really, like, if again, like everybody who was involved deserves praise and thanks for everything they did, but one person, Audrey Schaefer, who is the head of communications for IMP and like the 930 Club, and she was her job. She was our publicist, basically. Like her job was to get this in the press, and I've never seen anyone crush that so hard. Like she just, she got us everything that we needed to get this to be as visible as possible, so that the folks, the Congress people that we were talking to, kind of couldn't ignore it. And then the other thing was that we hired this really awesome lobbying firm, one of the bigger firms in the country, to make, to kind of like make our case professionally. And that was, I think, the other like really important move. And that was the thing that I had to figure out how to pay for.
Right.
It started out with like, the first round of funding came from, actually from the ticketing space, right? I mean, the first group of folks that are the most kind of bought into seeing the independent venues succeed are the independent ticketing companies. So C-Tickets, E-Tix, and Light were the first three companies to, help us to kind of have enough money to start paying the lobbyists for, a long enough period of time that we felt like we could get a positive outcome. And then after that, it was pretty dark and dismal for a few months. Like I called everybody that I could think of in the industry, adjacent industries, and no one had anything for us. Like there was no help out there. Like everyone was kind of fucked themselves. If they were in an adjacent industry, they had their own problems. And if they weren't focused on music, they were focused on healthcare or, employee and worker, kind of issues. Until I ran into Leor Cohen at YouTube Music, and he was just, he was a miracle, like this is somebody who, for me, like I grew up idolizing, the Beastie Boys and, his work in the label space. And somehow I ended up on a Zoom call, with this guy. And he was like, I heard the Troubadour was closing. Thank you, Audrey, for getting that in the press. Right. Right. We can't let that happen. What do I have to do? How can I help?
Awesome.
And we decided to create a moment. We decided to create a massive digital moment, using everything that, and I mean, YouTube, man, we got a day on the Google search bar for NEVA. Like you went to the Google search bar the Friday before the fest, and it said, click here to save our stages. And like billions of people, I think, probably saw that. I was just and like the conversations with, artist managers and teams that would never have taken a call from me or anybody I knew, like we're just like, yeah, let's go. How can we help? And around that same time, we, people had started to figure out how to do online fundraisers with a variety of different platforms, not just YouTube. And so we started to, get phone calls from like the managers of Fish or the Grateful Dead, and they were like, hey, we want to raise money for your cause. And so it went again from like this really kind of dismal moment to all of a sudden, like we started to have all the help that we needed. And it wasn't coming from outside our community. It was coming from our community. It was coming really from, all the artists who had played on our stages and knew that this was so critical. That's really what it came down to. It wasn't Congress. It wasn't, any particular group of companies. It was artists all over the world and all over the country who stood up alongside us and helped us to do this.
And that's really boiling it down that importance of those small venues, not only for the development of the careers for all these amazing artists that some of them have gone on and they're playing, festivals and stadiums. They all started somewhere, but also just like you mentioned with the Troubadour, that's like one memory that this one guy in the right place had. And as soon as he heard about it, his mind went back to like the 4 or 5 shows that were really important in his life, seeing him at the Troubadour or working with bands that were playing at the Troubadour. And as soon as it came to that, that was his breaking point where he's like, I got to snap in, I got to do something. What do we need to do? I'll throw all my weight behind it. But like, that's the importance. I mean, it was literally giving me chills, but the importance of that like one moment, that one show, that one small venue that really can shift this wave and, bring all this stuff back. I mean, it's really kind of amazing.
It was also really the start of adventures too, because the question that he asked me was kind of funny. He was so gentle. He was like, so here's the thing, like, do you think that these venues would be okay working with a big brand, like Coca-Cola or Anheuser-Busch? And I was like,
great question. Yeah.
I was like, well, yeah, I think they would be okay with that. Yeah.
Strange times makes for interesting bedfellows. And I think it was definitely the right time. So NEVA, obviously, the huge Save Our Stages Fest, we talked about the Shuttered Venue Operator Grant Program, but what's next? Where are we at with NEVA, and what's the kind of the future of that organization?
So I'm a little bit removed from that since my board period ended in June and I've focused on adventures, but I can tell you that really the biggest thing that's happening with NEVA right now is really twofold. One, we've begun to collect membership dues from our members so that we can ensure that the organization survives for the foreseeable future. And there has been, a ton of work on, obviously SVOG implementation has been a nightmare. So we've been working on that for a while. And there's a pretty simple set of priorities for the future, which include making sure that there's infrastructure in place so that something like this can never happen again. And then, kind of advocating on behalf of, so the NEVA as a whole is looking at what are the issues that impact venues everywhere, all of us, right? So those are things like, like insurance and, access to healthcare, access to resources for professional development. And, those are the kinds of things that NEVA is going to be focused on in the future. And also, we started a foundation that kind of sits alongside the association, which is focused on lobbying. And I think we're going to see a lot of really exciting new programs that keep kind of like at the base level, the connection between not just all of the owner and operator folks who are kind of, spearheading NEVA, but also between all of the people who are interested in working in the space currently. I think that's kind of like the future for NEVA is to circle up around, protecting workers' rights in the independent space and continuing to advocate for the larger issues. And I think there's, we'll probably have a pretty awesome conference at some point, so everybody gets together on the regular. There was just a really nice, groups of us have been meeting for the past, since it's been possible to do that. And that's been a really fun thing to like get to meet the people who we've been Zooming with and never seen for a few years. It's like kind of like a weird, but awesome kind of experience to do that.
Speaking of weird, how are things in Austin? How's Austin doing post-pandemic?
Well, Austin remains as weird as ever.
Yeah, great city.
It is a great city. It's interesting because every city has like kind of had a different sort of pandemic experience that really derives from, the way that their particular governments have handled things like social distancing and vaccination. Texas, I would say, is on the wrong side of the fence, from my personal beliefs. But, and so we had a particularly rough time kind of like keeping everybody safe, sure. Because as opposed, like, it's like we had enough problems as it is, just figuring out how to reopen in a socially distanced manner. But like we kind of, and so I reopened Empire outside, back in October of last year. Not because it was going to, help our business, but because it was going to help our staff and artists to like make a little bit of money so that they could keep going. But, the biggest challenge was when, the mask mandate was kind of just ripped off, with no warning. And we had to figure out, how and if we were going to continue operating and under what conditions to make sure that our staff was safe and that we were being responsible community members. So, thankfully, a lot of that has kind of worked out. Initially we had some trouble, like we were not allowed to like do, vax only shows. Like that was something that was literally like put into law, right? That we couldn't do that. And we spent a few weeks trying to figure out how to get around the law, and we finally did. And so, now it's like, well, you can't tell people that they have to have a vaccination, but you can say they have to provide a negative test result or a vaccination report. And so that's allowed us to kind of have some predictability, but we're still experiencing, no shows like that are way higher than usual. Usually you have like 10%, 15% of your tickets sold don't actually show up. But currently, until recently, even it's been like 40, 50% of the folks who buy a ticket don't show up for one reason or another. And about half of the shows that we booked cancel before they play off because there's a COVID event, or, the sales are not what the people expected. So, we're struggling and we're losing money still. And, thank goodness for the second tranche of SVOG funding, because that's what we need to, to get to the end of it, which is still not here. We're still experiencing loss.
Yeah.
And I think, the news outside is good. But we've seen kind of like, now like these two, like kind of cycles of things are getting better and people are coming out, and then they're getting worse and people are not coming out. And I'm wondering how long we're going to be seeing those cycles. I think people kind of were looking at things in a very kind of black and white sort of, well, either it's done or it's not. And when it's done, it's going to be great and everybody's going to come back. But it hasn't been that at all. It's been kind of like start, stop, who knows what direction we're going in, traffic jams, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I think there's just so many elements too, like you hit on it, where there's just like zero consistency across the entire country, right? Because even if you're trying to be consistent as a brand, or let's say a promoter that's bringing shows around is trying to be consistent, well, every city they're playing is different, every state they're playing is different,
right?
It's not only different from legislation, but different from maybe positivity rate, and flexing mandates on masks and stuff. So it's just presenting so many challenges. And hopefully, like you're saying, is, when we get to the other side, there can be a lot of learning from this to try to better regulate that and prepare for it should some sort of situation like this happen again, heaven forbid, and whether it's 2 years or 20 years.
Nobody wants to talk about it, but I mean, 20 years I think is more reasonable to think like something like this could happen again. That's definitely one of the things that we got to learn, right? Is like, we can't just there are stories about some folks who are smart enough to like put a clause in their insurance policy or something like that. But most people just were not prepared at all. And, that has to change, that we can't let that go on. And it's hard because it's like a lot of times that's at the expense of a short-term gain. Right. So right. Having that kind of, being able to think in that kind of, time frame is kind of like, it's almost like, we're lucky to be able to do that. Right. And the only way you get to do that is if we're good right now. And so I think the big, part of the big victory for, the Save Our Stages, from that legislation is allowing us the opportunity to think in that way. because before we had, the short-term stuff solved, couldn't think about it. Couldn't even begin to open that box. Right. But now we're at least in a position where we can do it.
Well, Steve, we thank you so much for your work as part of that great team to help so many of us get to that point where we can do what we love to do so much. Before we let you go, because I know you're a busy man, I want to hit you with our Fast Five. It's 5 quick questions, just looking for your instant response. How about your first concert?
Dave Matthews Band when I was 13. Actually, that's not true. Raffi was my first concert, but I don't really remember that.
How about your favorite concert?
My favorite concert, that's a tough question. Obviously, like I have lots of favorite concerts, but like the Save Our Stages Fest would probably qualify as like the baddest ass concert that I've ever put on. But like my favorite concert that I actually got to experience was we did a show at South by actually with Robert Glasper in 2017 with a group of musicians that he had never played on stage before with, but like really liked. So it was like him and Derek Hodges and Taylor McFerrin and Christian Scott. And I can't remember who the drummer was, but it was just like, kind of for me, like music is the best thing that you could possibly see on stage is a bunch of really powerful, like amazing musicians, just like exploring, not playing like their album, not doing like what you expect. And this show was just, a lot of people told me I was crazy to put a show like that on at South by. And it was actually one of the first things that was ever live streamed from South by. And it was the most successful stream of that week, which was crazy.
That's so cool.
And then they ended up forming a group and releasing records, together. And,
wow.
I like to think that maybe I had some small part in helping that to happen. And so that's my favorite concert experience.
Nice. That's a great answer. How about your biggest pet peeve?
Pet peeve in business would be I think just, hot air is my biggest pet peeve. Is like when people have a lot to say but don't do very much. That's something that I run into a lot. So
cosine. I'll join that bandwagon with you. I hate that.
Yeah, that's my.
How about your favorite guilty pleasure food? What's your favorite guilty pleasure comfort food?
Well, I just recently became mostly a vegetarian, so I'm going to go with the cheeseburger. That's my favorite. Thing that I'm not really supposed to have, but I love it still.
Mostly.
Last question. What is your theme song? So the reality TV show all about Steve, where cameras follow you around all the time. What is the one song that kind of sums you up that plays over the opening credits?
All right. Well, I'm going to give you 2 songs, one for the opening credits, one for the closing credits. Opening credits would be James Brown, Pay the Cost to Be the Boss.
Nice.
And then closing credits would be I Get By with a Little Help from My Friends by the Beatles.
Very nice.
Well, actually, maybe the version that
Joe Cocker?
Yeah, the Joe Cocker version is like,
yeah, solid.
He killed that.
Although I'll tell you what, Tank and the Bangas did a nasty cover of that for SOS Fest from Tipitina's. And that shit gave me chills. That was awesome.
Steve, if people want to learn more about Adventures or contact you, what's the best place for them to find you?
I'm Steve at ad.ventures. So that's pretty easy. And I'm on LinkedIn and Facebook and all the social stuff. So that's holler at me. I'm here.
There you go. Well, hey, I really appreciate your time today and sharing your adventures, if we will.
Yeah.
And it just was a lot of fun hearing your stories and really a unique perspective again from so much of us that were struggling through this period. For you to actually help find some of that magic was great.
Thank you guys for caring and asking good questions. I appreciate that.
And we thank everybody for listening to Adventures in Venueland. Remember, you can subscribe and find more episodes wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We love your 5-star reviews so you can help others find us. Until the next adventure, I'm Dave Rettelberger.
And I'm Paul Hooper. Thanks for listening, everyone. Adventures in Venueland is a side project of the Event and Arena Marketing Conference, a nonprofit organization bringing together people in the field of live entertainment to discuss marketing, publicity, and sales trends. Find out more at eventarenamarketing.com.
Audio editing and mixing by Camille Faulkner.
Design and digital advertising by Megan Ebeck.
Copywriting and publicity by Samantha Marker.
Guest booking and brand strategies by Paul Hooper.
Guest research by Dave Rettelberger.
Marketing strategies by Paul Hooper, Megan Ebeck, and Samantha Marker.
Do you want to be featured on our upcoming call-in episode? Call the Adventures in Venueland hotline at 859-421-1766 and tell us your favorite event day story.
Thanks for joining us. Until the next adventure.